How we doing, everyone? Welcome to class number 1, History of the Internet. Let's go like this. So, what I want to do is provide a framework for us to think about social and digital in today's environment. And in order for that to happen, I need to give you some backstory. When I say sort of, it is not the entire history of the internet. It's a selected highlight reel, so to speak. So some of these things may be familiar to you, some of them may not be familiar to you, but we'll get there. Ready? So to start, if someone were to ask you, what year was the internet born? And a date were to pop up into your head, what date would that be? Go ahead, blurt it out loud. Blurt, 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 blurt. Okay, you got the date? You sure? October 1969. You know, you could think about man walked on the moon in July of 1969. And in October 1969, we can say the internet was born. And one could argue that I wonder which of those two significant events were actually more significant. Only history will let us know, or only history will tell. So the first internet, called the ARPANET, had one connection from UCLA to SRI, which is in Menlo Park, California, so Southern California to Northern California. And the professor from UCLA tried to send a message. He got LO, and then the system crashed. So the first message ever sent on the internet had 2 characters in it, and it crashed the system. But this ARPANET development really started in 1962. ARPA is the defense research arm for the United States government. And in 1962, if we go back into our history books, was you want to talk about nuclear, this is the Cuban Missile Crisis, and let's just say that nuclear annihilation was more real than not. And Washington was afraid that if the East Coast got hit by a nuclear weapon and the telephone poles and the telephone lines got knocked out, there'd be no way to contact the silos to launch their nukes on anybody else. So they wanted a communication network. Think of how morbid this sounds right here. The internet was created in the in the spirit of nuclear annihilation, so to speak. But yes, that's really what happened. They needed telephone lines are synchronous. Okay, you pick the phone up, someone on the other side of that line picks it up, and okay, you can talk to each other. But they needed an asynchronous communication system, and also a communication system that didn't have a direct one-way path to get to the end point. They needed multiple different ways. So they needed these hubs or routers that would then take the packet and switch it, packet switching, to another location. Sort of like routing, a router device. Between 1969 and 1990, not that much happened, so to speak. Oh, how do I get out of here? Let me show you something real quick. For instance, this is the network in 1992. This was almost the entire internet network in 1992. And what you see is some major hubs. Here's Seattle. Here's San Francisco with a hub towards Palo Alto. Here's UCLA and Los Angeles with a hub towards San Diego. And then there's a hub out here in Denver to Boulder and Salt Lake City. Here's the campus of University of Illinois, which will become significant in a minute or two. We had Georgia Tech down here probably. NASA, Houston. Okay. Up here, MIT. When we say Pittsburgh, this is Carnegie Mellon. Michigan was another big hub. College Park was a big hub. This was going up to Princeton, and Princeton was a hub. You're talking about, I don't know, a couple dozen nodes, right? And there was only like 1 or 2 international nodes, which we'll get to in a second. Really, really, really small. And part of the other reason why it was really small was, let's go back to presentation, there wasn't that much to do on it. Okay? The internet at that time was text only. Okay? And the only people that were allowed to have a network or a router or a server on the internet were U.S. government, research type facilities like SRI, the military industrial complex like Lockheed Martin, and universities. And that's pretty much it. There wasn't that many computer scientists out there that knew how to use this thing. Well, one of those computer scientists out there that knew how to use this thing was Tim Berners-Lee. We'll get to him in a second. And then really, a lot of people say when the internet was born, a lot of people use either the 1990 date, which is a pretty good date, or the 1995 date, which was the beginning of the 1.0 era boom. So let's get into some of that. So Tim Berners-Lee, right? He was at CERN. CERN is in Switzerland. And he was he's an Englishman, and he was there for a couple years. In March 1990, the first non-US link from Cornell to CERN was created. So the first link outside the US went to Switzerland and went to CERN, right? So Tim Berners-Lee knew about the internet, but he had no access to it because he was at CERN. He got access to it, and 6 months later, he created the first web browser. He wanted to make the internet graphical and not just text. In order to do this, he had to create a new language to convert the text to graphics. He called it HTML, Hypertext Markup Language. He created the WWW, the World Wide Web, and he needed to create some kind of a transfer protocol to get from one page to the next page, which is why HTTP was at the beginning of everything that we saw, because that was the computer code to get you from page to page. http://www.cnn.com. Well, that came a lot later. The first web pages that were ever created on the internet were created by Tim, and Tim basically described the project, and that was pretty much it. At present, we are on HTML5, the 5th generation of the hypertext markup language. The entire internet as we know it in 2018 runs on HTML. So this guy Tim Berners-Lee's got to be like a Zuckerberg, Bezos, Tim Cook, Bomber / I don't know, the richest guy in the world, right? Everything on the internet, right? It's all him, right? Well, maybe the reason you don't know him is he created this as an open source language, and he's not a billionaire. He's a millionaire. He's doing very well for himself. He's not sweating anything right now. But no, he's not a Zuckerberg-like, Jeff Bezos-like, Bill Gates-like billionaire. Quick side note, Al Gore invented the internet. You might have heard this. You can Google this. The answer is no. He did in 1991 sponsor the High Performance Computing and Communication Act. He wanted to see if he could get businesses to become part of the internet, away from the military industrial complex, away from just universities. He wanted more people involved. There were very few commercial interests on the internet at this time. In 1989, MCI, one of the baby bells, and CompuServe had some kind of an email thing only. Using the internet backbone in 1990, PSI.net created some pipes, which some of those pipes are still being used. But that's it. Okay? Another one of the famous grandfathers, and I'll use the word grandfather in air quotes, is Mark Andreessen. Okay? He's younger than me. I'm old as dirt, but he's younger than me, and I'm calling him a grandfather. 1992-ish, he was an undergrad at University of Illinois, main campus, Urbana-Champaign. While he was an undergrad, he was working for the National Center of Supercomputing Applications, okay? One of the workers in there was this guy named Eric. And Eric and Mark knew about Tim Berners-Lee HTML open web. I mean, Tim stuff had been out for about a year and a half by that time. They wanted to create something more user-friendly. So they created some code, and they called it the Mosaic web browser, which was a lot easier to use than Tim's. All right? He graduated in 1993. He moved to California, met Jim Clark, the founder of Silicon Graphics, a multimillionaire. Jim Clark said, "Ooh, wait a minute. This browser thing seems like a big deal. The more browser things that people use, the more Silicon graphic mainframe computers people would buy. Let's create a company." So they created Mosaic Communications Corporation in 1994. Let's just say the University of Illinois was not very happy with that, so they had to change the name of the company to Netscape. They changed the browser to the Netscape Navigator browser. And within 9 months of forming Netscape's Communications, the company, they did an IPO in 9 months, and Mark Andreessen became the first .com billionaire. He was on the cover of Time magazine, and everybody went, "Whoa, what just happened?" A 24-year-old within 9 months creates $1 billion company without any employees. What? The Internet 1.0 boom had become. So the 1.0 era was roughly from 95 to 2001. Okay? The sentiment really was, I don't know what this internet thing is. I really don't. But someone's making a lot of money, and I went in. So this is the New York public markets, particularly NASDAQ, particularly the New York Stock Exchange. This is the venture capital markets, which were very big in New York, a little bit in Boston, very, very big in Silicon Valley, right? During this time period, the economy was very, very strong. AOL came out during this time period, Amazon, of course, Netscape we just described, eBay, Yahoo. But also during this time, and we'll get to this in a second, massive flameouts like Pets.com and Webvan and Dr. Coop and Lycos and Excited Home. It was exciting. It was a new language. It was different culture. It was different. But oh my God, was it a bubble. Meaning, I don't know what this thing is, but I went in kind of mentality. It kind of reminds me of crypto now. As soon as you say crypto, people go, ooh. They really don't know what it is. They can't explain it. They don't know how to buy it. They don't know how to trade it. They don't know what to do with it. But everybody's excited about crypto. And they can't explain to you why they're excited about crypto, but it seems like kind of, ooh. Yeah, that's kind of the internet in 1997, 98, 99. You're probably too young to remember any of that. But, I was right in the middle of it, following it as it came along. Again, I told you I'm old as dirt. It's interesting that most of these internet companies ignored most traditional business practices, like profitability, like market share. They kept saying that they are the new. I remember seeing all these crazy Business Week and Wall Street Journal articles like, oh my God, everything's going to go to the internet. What are we going to do with malls? What are we going to do? Pave them over and turn them into parks? It was crazy time. But in reality, most of the .coms that were created during this time were nothing more than a digital representation of something that was not digital. For instance, the mentality during this time was, okay, I normally print this very expensive 110-page annual report once a year. It's really expensive to print, so let's make a digital version of that too and throw it up on our webpage, and that's the corporate webpage for our corporation. That was the mentality back then. It was nothing more than a digital brochure of something that was physical. Pets.com was nothing more than a pet store, which already existed. Webvan was the first internet supermarket. Dr. Coop was the first medical doctor help site. I want to get into something important now, and I like to call it the top-down world. This is all part of the top-down world. This is a Dr. Dano phrase. I'm going to apologize right now. I'm going to say it 100 times every time we meet virtually. Every time we make a video, you're going to hear me say top-down world. In the top-down world, you asked who is in control. Prior to 2001, the control was always in the hands of the very, very few. There were few media outlets, okay? It was a one-way world, meaning, think about it from a pyramid. There was the editor or owner of the New York Times, there was the employees of the New York Times, and then there was readers of the New York Times, and things flowed in one direction. Sure, you can write a letter to the editor, and maybe like a couple hundred a week got sent to the editor, and maybe like 4 got published a day. I mean, the crowd was passive. Both technologically, there was no way for the crowd to respond, and also culturally, the crowd wasn't conditioned to respond. There was no widespread culture of crowd participation. There were very, very, very few digital tools for the crowd to have a voice prior to 2001. So if we look at 2001 and 2004, Reid Hoffman often calls this the time period the internet winter. Okay? So the bubble really was growing and growing and growing from 1995 to 2000, right? The economy really was starting to weak, especially everything outside of tech was already very weak. But even tech started to get a little weak in 2000. Some of those companies that IPO'd in 97 and 98 and 99, after having 6, 8, 10, 12 quarters of, I don't know when we're going to be profitable, public confidence in these firms started to weaken. There was a massively contested election at this time that kind of divided the country a bit. There was this Y2K bug thing, if you remember that. But really, the major knife that was jammed into the bubble was the AOL Time Warner merger. This is in 2001 dollars, $164 billion. And oh, by the way, the media called this a merger. It wasn't a merger. This is an AOL takeover of Time Warner. This is that little company that sends discs to you in the mail. Remember you used to get discs in the mail? Is buying a blue chip New York Stock Exchange stalwart out of Manhattan. A lot of people really had a very difficult time wrapping their heads around this thing. It was like a sobering moment. Like, whoa, wait a minute. Is all this internet stuff really real? Really? How does AOL, how do they make money? And then the veneer of the bubble started to, it was a sobering moment. Okay, it was a reality check. And if the AOL Time Warner merger wasn't a big knife to puncture the bubble, well, September 11th was. You want to talk about a sobering moment, that was a horrendously horrific sobering moment. And all the go-go years, and yep, that was it. That was it. That pretty much ended the 1.0 era. Companies kept going under, they couldn't get any more funding, and in 2001, if you go into Wikipedia, half of the companies that I listed on the other page, they all went belly up in 2001. Okay? Interesting, though, in 2001, during September 11th, the top-down media reporters in New York City, particularly ones at the New York Times, they only could file 1 report a day. But during New York City, during 9/11, and during the first week and during the first month post 9/11, so much was happening around 9/11 that they couldn't get their stories into the paper, yet they wanted to write them. And kind of this is when blogging really first took off, was around 9/11. So if we look during this internet winter, okay, there were some Web 2.0 things bubbling up during this time period. All right, we can talk about Classmates.com, which originally operated in a top-down format. It was just a way for you to find high school classmates. Okay, it wasn't really a true social network. Now, Reid Hoffman and Peter Thiel in 1997 tried to create a real social network, SocialNet. It went nowhere. I mean, you guys never even heard of SocialNet. Google was founded in 1998, okay? Google really didn't get moving until 2000, 2001, 2002, and they went public in 2003, I believe. No one knew who Google was in 1998 or 99. You might have heard of them. Definitely by 2000. But Google wasn't a thing until 2001, 2002, 2003. But Google was the first time where the power of the crowd started to get noticed. One of the founders of Twitter created Blogger first. He sold it to Google in 2002 or 2001. This was the first open Blogger platform. Okay, very few people did it, but at least it was the first time. Prior to Blogger, the only way for you to be able to crowd participate was for you to code your own website. You had to hard code it. HTML. If you couldn't do HTML, forget it. Wikipedia was 2001. Friendster was probably the first social network, right? LinkedIn was 2002, even though no one remembered about LinkedIn. It's really small time. Oh, let me go back. Sidebar comment, you guys are going to look up the PayPal Mafia. Okay, PayPal sold in 2003. eBay bought them out. And the members of PayPal, including Reid Hoffman, cashed out. And they tended to fund a lot of the next version of the internet. Reid Hoffman created LinkedIn. Peter Thiel was also part of SocialNet and part of the PayPal Mafia. MySpace was probably the first social network people were kind of going, oh, what's this? And you heard of people that had a MySpace account. They got up to 50 million. They got up to like 100 million. Like, oh my God, there's 100 million people using this thing. Oh my gosh. Also between 1999 and 2003, broadband penetration and market share. Most homes in the United States started to get broadband, which is really cool. Flickr was 2004. Facebook was 2004. And I know you guys all saw the movie. Facebook in 2004 was him in his dorm room, okay? Really wasn't 2006, 2007, 2008 where Facebook became a thing. Really 2007, 2008. So this shift I call the bottom-up world, and I'm apologizing it because every time I'm going to say top-down world, I'm probably going to say bottom-up world with it. Traditional exchanges are transactional. They're one way, they're firm to consumer, one to many. This is top-down. Modern exchanges in today's Web 2.0 era, which I like to peg around 2004-ish, it's multi-way. B2C, C2B, C2C, consumer to consumer, consumer to business. This is the bottom-up world. So the internet moved away from just creating a digital representation of something physical to that existed in the real world to you can only do this on the internet. The reason why Amazon survived is no bookstore could ever carry 1 million books. The reason why eBay survived is because the only way to connect that many buyers and sellers is digitally. You can't have a flea market like that without you physically have to going to flea market to flea market to flea market to yard sale to yard sale to yard sale. eBay was something significantly more effective and impactful. This is the Web 2.0 world. This is the bottom-up world. Now, between 2004 and 2008, this is sort of like the kindergarten. All right, WordPress is the largest blogging platform. Flickr, I already mentioned, but Flickr was really one of the first social networks, even though it was a photo sharing thing. What people like the most about Flickr is being able to contact and connect and send messages back and forth to each other, which was noticed by Mr. Zuckerberg when he started playing around with Facebook. Okay, YouTube was born in 2005, which, by the way, were two guys of part of the PayPal Mafia. They turned around and sold it to Google about a year later, slightly more than a year later, for $1 billion. So what we're seeing is why the venture capital money dried up from the internet bubble 1.0 because so many people got burned. The millionaires that survived out of the Web 1.0 world created the Web 2.0 firms. I mean, look into PayPal Mafia to see how many people funded became angel investors for the companies that would become the biggest companies that you can think of. Twitter was 2006, okay? And this is Ev Williams, who made all his money selling Blogger to Google. And then he created Twitter. In 2006, the Time magazine of the cover looked like a mirror, and the person of the year was you, the crowd. 2007, we got Tumblr. In 2007, we got the iPhone, Generation 1. Okay? Things are starting to move. By the way, this was during the time of another bubble, by the way, right? This is that big housing bubble. We have 2008 coming up. Now, in 2008, even though the iPhone was in 2007, 2008, really, it's when the App Store was developed is when the iPhone became a thing. The first version everybody thought was, hey, that's pretty cool, but I don't know anyone who owns one. 2008 was like, oh, okay, yeah, I got to get one of those. I want an app. I want the apps. The apps became the driving function, the killer app for the iPhone. We had a 2008 election, which was very crowd-powered. Okay? In 2009, we had the Miracle on the Hudson. Perhaps you saw the movie Sully. But the reason why I have this is, Twitter was founded in 2006, but Twitter in 2006 and 2007 and 2008, like, good luck trying to find, you ask 100 people what Twitter is, and none of them would have it. But in 2009, it was actually Robin Roberts out of her apartment watched the Miracle on the Hudson and took the first photograph and posted it on Twitter, and all of a sudden Twitter became a thing. In Android, we got Android in 2009. They created their app store right out the gate. By 2011, Android was very stable and very solid with a very large app store and user base. Instagram was 2010. Snapchat was 2012. Now, it's interesting that on this page, I have the iPhone, I have Android, I have Instagram, and I have Snapchat. And the reason why is during this time period, okay, 2008, we already had 10 years to 1998 of people growing up using the internet on a computer. That's 10 years of people going to a web browser on a computer. But by 2008 to 2012, by the end of 2012, probably more than 50 to 60, probably 2/3 of the U.S. population had a pocket computer in their pocket. And all of a sudden, we weren't at home just using the internet. We were using the internet everywhere, all the time, for all kinds of things, because these things were that good, right? So it was a complete shift to mobile. A lot of people think that in 2012, this was really the birth of the Web 3.0 era. To me, I'm not a fan of that. I don't think that just because we went from desktop to mobile and app, and the majority of the people that access the internet access it this way, that was a fundamental shift. I don't think so. Because usually when I think of shifts, I think of them in terms of culture. And the bigger shift was not the shift in technology. The bigger shift is the shift in behavior and culture. Okay? The idea of, oh, wait a minute, in 2009, I can break news as a person. I just saw this plane land on the Hudson. I can tell that story. I can be a blogger, and my Politico blog, or the Drudge Report, or insert your other political blog here, the Huffington Post, can be just as powerful as a voice as a traditional top-down 100-year-old firm like the New York Times or the Washington Post. Right? To me, it's the culture that drives this bottom-up world. We live in a world now that we don't just watch TV passively. I watched the Super Bowl, and I probably did about 200 tweets in a 2 to 3 hour period between rating the commercials and commenting to friends and family about my Eagles. Okay? This is the bottom-up world. This is the crowd in action. This is the crowd being active. Okay? To summarize this up, I've already made the case, or in my head made the case, that the shift to mobile wasn't enough to be a 3.0. I'm constantly looking for the 3.0. Right? Is 3.0 The Internet of Things, the first time I heard that was in 2015. By 2016 and 17, this was one of them big buzzwords that people kept throwing around. I don't think so. I think this is just making the physical digital. Like, I used to be able to walk, and now I can walk and figure out how many steps I took. Yeah, I don't think that's a major shift. I think it's interesting, but not a major shift. Big data, artificial intelligence, is that the 3.0? I don't know. I don't think so. Augmented reality, would that be a shift to 3.0? I mean, we've had big data for a while now. We've had artificial intelligence for a long time now. No. Augmented reality, we're starting to see more and more and more and more. Okay, is that really a shift? I don't know about that one. Virtual reality, we really don't see that much virtual reality right now. I mean, there are a few platforms. There's HoloLens. There's Microsoft's product. I forget what it's called. HTC has a... ask 100 people, and how many people have actually seen virtual reality? Maybe 5 to 10. How many people use it daily? Maybe 0. Virtual reality has the potential to completely shift. Instead of us accessing the internet the way we do, I mean, for all intents and purposes, this is just a smaller mobile version of this thing that I'm recording this conversation on. Okay, it's not that big of a major shift, but virtual reality could change everything. You know, no longer would need to commute to work. You would go to the virtual office. You would just, to go to where you would do everything virtually. Other than maybe eating, what wouldn't you be able to eating and maybe medicine? Everything else you could probably do in a virtual world. Everything. I like movies, very much like The Matrix. Would that be a monster shift? Yeah, that would be. Do I see virtual reality happening anytime in the next 3 to 5 years? No. I think we're seeing when we were talking about this internet winter time period, classmates.com was really 10 years before we really shifted to a bottom up. Social Net was 10 years before we shifted to a bottom up. Google, Blogger, Wikipedia, Friendster, this was 5-6 years before we really saw. I mean, it really wasn't until here when we started to see it. And even here, no one knew what WordPress was. Flickr was nascent. Facebook barely existed. Twitter existed, but, there was 11 employees. Tumblr, iPhone, in 2008, I mean, if they sold 10,000 phones for the year, that was a really big deal. If they sold 20,000 phones, that was now they sell 75 million, 20 million phones. Now every 3 months they sell 50 million phones. There's 1 billion iOS devices out there on the planet right now. Instagram and Snapchat were a shift to mobile. These were social networks that were mobile only shift. But I don't know. Virtual reality, I think we're still 3, 5, 6 years out. And then it'll take another 6 to 10 years before it's accepted the way the crowd is communicating now. All right, so this framework of top-down versus bottom-up is going to fuel everything that we do from here on out and all the other modules. This is the main component of the history lecture from the first class. Your first module is going to be marketing management. We're going to talk about market orientation. And when you're thinking about market orientation, I want you to think about, how does market orientation fit in this bottom-up world? Hint, hint, suggestion. I thank you for your time. I thank you for your energy. Use the force. Email me questions. Thanks. End slideshow. As soon as I figure out how to end the slideshow. Stop recording.